right. Good evening. Welcome to the March 24th meeting of the Finance Committee.
This conference will now be recorded.
On tonight's agenda, we're going to look at the budgets for the Emergency Management Department, Fire and Rescue Management, and also the DPW and all its divisions. We have some transfers to vote on and no minutes to review. I'm going to go a little out of order here and just take this one transfer now. This is from DDIS Animal Control Department, and I see Darlene is here to tell us about it. Do you want to tell us a little something about the transfer, Ms. Coyle?
Sure. Thank you so much, Ann, and good evening, all. So we have a transfer for the funds from animal control, and unfortunately we had a couple of emergencies that occurred. We had a couple weeks ago, we had no heat in the kennel, and so we had to have an HVAC professional come out, and they determined that there was a circuit board that needed to be replaced. That bill was kind of unexpected, definitely, and it was about $1,200. At the same time, in the same week, we noticed that the water heater that is actually suspended in the air, it's above our washer and dryer in there, and the corrosion on it was causing the water heater starting to leak. We don't want to, we don't want to take any chances, so we had the plumber come out and replace the water heater. And again, because it's suspended in the air, we needed to do it right away. That bill was approximately $800, so we had $2,000 of unexpected repairs. So we are asking for the transfers that you have before you tonight. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Gentlemen, any questions?
My only question would be, do we expect any additional costs for office supplies or vaccinations, since those are the two accounts that are being tapped?
I think we're going to be okay in those areas. We do have a little bit of money left in some of the other line items if we have to move money around, but I think, knock on wood, I think we're doing okay right now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so go ahead.
And just a quick.
Yep.
Darlene, just through the chair, the vaccination, money left in the vaccination account, is that because we didn't run clinics and whatnot this year due to COVID, or why do we have that 1,000 left there?
So that line item we actually use for several things. So that helps us on clinics, as you indicate, but that also helps us for any of the staff that may need to get vaccinations to protect them in the line of duty for animal control. Currently, all of our staff are vaccinated with appropriate vaccinations, but we do carry that there because we know that's been an unexpected cost in the past. So that's the reason for that line item.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So I'll read these two transfers. The first one is coming from the office supply line, $400 going to the kennel maintenance line. And the next is coming from the vaccination line, $1,000 going to kennel maintenance. Okay, and that will zero out the vaccination line. Okay, do I hear a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Let me call the roll. Kevin?
Yes.
Ed?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
And myself, yes. Okay, that's...
Thank you all so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Have a good night.
You too. All right, so the next thing we're going to look at is the budget for emergency management. And I see Mr. Otterson's with us. Thank you for joining. Okay, do you
No
want to?
problem. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to answer any questions, of course, with the assistance of Mr. Kasanovich on the budget.
Okay. Do you want to tell us anything about the budget, Eric?
I know when I talked with Ed, level funded budget, other than he did put some monies into a generator maintenance account, which you would see a small increase there. That continues to be a big part of our infrastructure is generated in the event of a emergency disaster. So that's something that we want to make sure that we cover well.
Okay, I can recall us making transfers into that line item, so it's a good thing to see it's been adjusted up a little bit. Gentlemen, do you have any questions?
Eric, can you just quickly tell us what emergency management does? I mean, this is sort of a standard budget we see year after year, but what role do you fulfill in the town? Just briefly, as the emergency management director, and you're kind of a one-man show here, but what would you be tasked to do? So I can answer just most recently on what I've been doing is I work closely with my with the deputy director with obviously meeting with department heads, circling in MEMA a lot. We were pretty active during COVID as the town liaison to MEMA in getting the infrastructure that they need in terms of PPE, coordinating with the National Guard and delivering that. So liaison between the department heads, town administration, and to MEMA and dealing with COVID, also operating the EOC. We did that with some of the civil unrest that we had earlier with some protests that we had in town, operating the EOC and serving as the liaison between that, MEMA, and also the department heads and interagency operability as well. Perfect, thank you.
Good, thank you. Let me just read the budget here. The emergency management, the total budget is, town manager recommends $17,500, which is a $2,000 increase to a fiscal 2021 appropriation. And of course, that increase is due to the increase in the generator maintenance line. Any other questions? Okay, do I hear a motion to recommend?
Motion to recommend.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you. Okay, all in favor. Kevin?
Yes.
Ed?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
And myself, yes. Okay? All set, Mr. Otterson. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. I may stay on and watch some of the rest of the meeting, but Kevin, good to see you.
Okay, good.
We
Okay,
gotta get you a hobby, Eric, if you want to stay and watch this.
all right. So I see Chief Coleman
Good
is
luck.
here. Good evening, Chief Coleman, and do you have a presentation for us? Great, thank you.
I do. Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening to the committee. Let me just figure out quickly how to share this screen.
Looks good.
I just got to move a couple of things around here on my desktop. Hang on one sec. All right. You're able to see that?
Yep, yes.
Okay. Thank you. So again, good evening. I figure, Madam Chair, just to kind of keep things simple, we might be able to answer some of the questions with the budget as we go. So tonight we'll do a quick budget breakdown. We'll talk a little bit about ambulance receipts versus tax levy. We'll talk about force deployment. I know we have a few newer members that I've had the opportunity to meet, but I think it's always good, especially with some of the additions and changes that we've had to the department over the last couple of years, just to kind of bring the committee up to speed on where we sit right now with force deployment and how our resources are deployed amongst the community. We'll do a line item review, and then we'll talk about our CIP, and then we'll do a quick question and discussion. So. All right. So this year's budget total is $3,668,045. And how that breaks down this year is 23% of the budget, or about $1,075,000, comes from the ambulance appropriations account as a direct offset to the budget. And then the balance of $2,593,045 comes from the tax levy. So just about a quarter of our budget comes from the ambulance revenue account. So just a little historical perspective on some of the last few fiscal years. In FY18, our collections were a little over $1 million. Between fiscal 19 and 20, we were up over the $1.5 million in collections. And then as we sit to date in FY21, we're about $845,000 with still several months to go in the fiscal year. Mm-hmm. So this, as I looked at the historical data today, this is typically where we would sit. We would anticipate probably about another $300,000 in collections between now and the end of the fiscal year. However, in speaking with the president of Comstar, who is our billing company, we're actually going to anticipate a little bit of a revenue reduction this year due to COVID-19. And this is pretty standard across the state with both municipal and private ambulance services, and it's a trend that we're seeing around the country. Going back to a year ago this month when COVID caused essentially the state and local municipalities to shut down, we saw a significant reduction in call volume, especially in that first 30 to 45 days. Mm-hmm. Because, quite frankly, people were, not only were they not able to leave the house because there was nowhere to go, but quite frankly, people were actually afraid to go to the emergency room. So although we were doing less ambulance call volume during that time, not surprisingly, the patients that we were transporting were very, very sick, and much sicker in some cases than we normally see for things like, take for example, chest pain. Typically when someone has chest pain, they call 911 within, the onset or at least within a few hours of having chest pain. We were responding to calls where people were having chest pain for 3 or 4 days, and they were very, very sick patients at that point in time. So just this general fear that people had of even going to an emergency room during the COVID pandemic, we saw a reduction in call volume. Even motor vehicle accidents. I mean, we essentially do motor vehicle accidents in this community, almost on a daily basis, and we went about 3 weeks without a motor vehicle accident the end of March, beginning of April. So the slowdown in those early months, things started to pick back up around summer, but the math makes sense when you look at March, April, and May, and then things started to pick back up in June. Really, that's the equivalent of the 3 months, or that translates into what I'm estimating to be a reduction of somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000. It's hard to put a pin on it, but just looking at the data historically, that's what we would anticipate with that reduction of call volume. But again, in the last couple of years, we've jumped by over $500,000 in what our receipts normally were. So although there is a reduction, it really doesn't concern me at this point because, call volume is essentially back to normal now, and we'll make that up, next fiscal year. So it's not something that worries me, but, just when we look at the data, I just want the committee to at least understand where that number sits. So as far as our force deployment, the department consists of 41 full-time members. You have a chief, a deputy chief, one administrative assistant. We were very, very fortunate and lucky to finally fill that second full-time fire inspector's position this year with the medical retirement of Captain Stephen Anderson. So, as you recall, I received permission to fill the position 3 years ago, and then when the captain went on injured on duty status, we were put in a holding pattern for many years. So this past January, we hired internally our last call firefighter, Joshua Donovan, who's a fire protection engineer. We were very, very fortunate to get Mr. Donovan into that position. To have engineering services on the fire protection level in-house is a huge asset to the community, and just within the last several months, on many of the large projects we have going, he certainly proved his worth in that position. So we're very happy to have Mr. Donovan on board. And then we have 36 full-time firefighter paramedics and EMTs. How that breaks out is you have 4 working groups of 9 members that operate from 2 stations, and our minimum shift staffing is 7. As this committee can recall and remember, since I've been chief, which will be 10 years next month, I've been advocating for the increase of our minimum staffing to go from 6 to 7. So this fiscal year, we were finally able to do that. And, as the town manager and Mr. Kazanovich will tell you, over the last several years, I've been advocating to move that minimum staffing from 7 to 8. Unfortunately, it took a decade to move it this far, and in turn, the call volumes continue to increase. Things haven't gotten slower, and we'll talk about it a little bit as far as the station breakout, but it would really be great to move that needle again and go from 7 to 8 from minimum staffing. So how that breaks out currently is each group has a captain and a lieutenant. The captain works out of headquarters, the lieutenant works out of Station 2, and there's 7 firefighters to the group, and on each group, that consists of 5 paramedics and 2 basic EMTs. So out of Station 1, we have an engine of 4 firefighters when we are at 9. So, typically it's a good day when we're at 9, but with, paid time off, with vacation, personal days, or sick days, we typically hover in the 7-8 range. Most of the time we're operating at 7, statistically over the course of a year. But when we're at 9, we have 4 on the engine. If we were at 8, we'd have 3. If we were at our minimum of 7, we would have 2 on the engine. And then the headquarters ambulance is staffed with 2 paramedics. 2 EMTs at the paramedic level. Station 2, we have an ambulance staffed with 2 at the paramedic level. The lieutenant staffs a shift supervisor vehicle. And if everyone is in the station, so if all 3 people are in the station, we are able to staff the West Auburn engine, which is engine 1, and we're able to roll that engine. But if we're at our minimum, or if we're out on an ambulance call, we have multiple ambulance calls going on. Unfortunately, that engine is browned out, and it's not able to get on the road. So if we were able to, again, move that needle from 7 to 8 as far as our minimum shift staffing, that would give us consistency. It would put 4 firefighters at the West Street Station. It would give us consistency to staff that engine, at least with 2 members. It's not ideal, but at least it would put the engine on the road, and it would keep that engine staffed consistent. As I believe I mentioned last year, when we were going through the housing project, the Blaker Street housing project, which is a 40B project, which will put an additional 320 housing units on Blaker Street. If you recall, when that process was going on through the Board of Selectmen, I made it known through those public hearings that the construction of 320 housing units will have a direct impact on the fire rescue department. In fact, we are the department in the community that will most likely be affected the most by the construction of these, not only with emergency call volume, which I peg estimated at this point at about 100 additional emergency calls a year, but the types of facilities and the construction of these, they're also going to require annual inspections. So that's going to be additional inspections on our code compliance unit as well. Once that project is fully up and operational, early estimates during those public presentations was that we'll bring in somewhere between $1 and $1.3 million in additional tax revenue. And I stated through that public hearing process that at that time, and I've also communicated this with the town manager and the CFO, that at that time, when the buildings are fully operational, I will be seeking 4 additional firefighter positions to, again, move the minimum shift staffing from 7 to 8, put 4 firefighters operating in the West Street station so we can consistently have the West Auburn engine up. So that's not something that will hit my budget, this year or even next year. But in the next couple of years, as we start occupying some of those buildings, that will be a request that you see in future budgets. But again, it won't be until we have that additional tax revenue on the rolls. So the budget that you have before you is essentially a level service budget. There's 2 line items that had very modest increases by a few $1,000s. But other than that, it's a level service budget. Now, when you look at the budget, it shows that it's an increase of 8.10%, but that's actually, it's really 5.8% as it relates to the tax levy. And in the next slide, we'll talk about why that is with the new position that we have in this budget. So it's really a 5.8% increase on the levy, and that 5% increase, probably about 5.1 or 5.2% of that is from contractual obligations that are owed to members. So this budget does have 1 new position in the budget, and it's called the Community Paramedic and EMS Educator. It's a critical new position that will ultimately be funded through the state's Certified Expenditure Program. And this is a program that's funded through Medicare, and essentially what the program is Medicare recognizes that ambulance services, especially municipal ambulance services, when we transport Medicare or Medicaid patients, we're doing that at a negotiated reduced rate. So that rate currently through Medicare is $400. So it doesn't matter whether we provide $1,000 worth of medications and skills and whatever we're doing in the truck, it's a flat fee of $400. So, and again, you've heard me say this, I hate to talk about ambulance calls from a dollars and cents perspective because it's not the goal and it's not why we're here. But fortunately or unfortunately, however you look at it, there is a dollars and cents, conversation that goes on here. But so when you're transporting a Medicare patient, from a financial perspective, you're already operating in the red when it comes from an equipment and a supply and just an operating perspective. So Medicare recognizes that, and they allow municipalities through a separate application process to basically prove, the amount of Medicare calls that you did, show all of your expenses within the community, right down from fuel to personnel to, you name it. And they translate that into reimbursement. And in speaking with the CPE manager from the state, I'm going to estimate that we're going to have next fiscal year a CPE return somewhere in the neighborhood of about $90,000. And I am being conservative on that number, but that is by design. But we're going to anticipate about a $90,000 return. So this new position is funded this year through ambulance receipts, but the plan for next year, the application process will open this year in October. We will file that application. We would expect to receive funds in June to be applied towards next fiscal year's budget. So this position would then translate from ambulance revenue over to the CPE program, which would fund this position. This position is ultimately going to be responsible for the EMS education and continuing education hours for our 40 EMTs and paramedics within the department. EMTs require 40 hours of continuing education training biannually, and our paramedics require 84 hours biannually, so essentially 42 hours a year. Just to put that into perspective, nurses are required to obtain 16 hours of continuing education every 2 years, and they don't even have to prove that to a recognized body. They have to have the continuing ed, but they only have to show that they've done it if asked in a proving it scenario. That's different for EMTs and paramedics. We not only have to do the continuing ed hours, but it has to be submitted both state and nationally, and then rectified, and then recertification cards would be issued. So there's a tremendous amount of hours, training hours, that need to be put on in the course of a year in order to keep 40 members up to snuff with what they need for Con Ed. We have 2 lieutenants right now who are doing this, I will say, on a part-time basis, because again, although they're full-time employees, they work 24-hour rotating shifts. So there's no consistency to the training and education. There's no consistency on a daily basis for Con Ed or training. Many of the programs that we're doing are handoff programs. They're being taught by multiple instructors. And quite frankly, we can and should be doing better. One of the other things that this position will assume is we've had conversations with the Board of Health. As you know, the town of Auburn contracts with a part-time public health nurse. And, typically on an annual basis in a pre-global pandemic world, it's not a bad scenario. We pay currently $10,000 for our part-time public health nurse, and again, it's not a bad deal. We saw some glaring gaps in this system during COVID, because our public health nurse that we have is not only the public health nurse for Auburn, but she's the health nurse for 18 other communities. So let's just say that she has been extremely busy over the last year, and it's not always easy to get her on the phone and to assist Auburn maybe in the way that we would need it. So in conversations with Darlene Coyle and Eileen, this community paramedic would be able to serve the role of the public health nurse. Although it's called a public health nurse, when you look at what the requirements are under the state law and what a community has to have, they need to have a person in place to do, these health functions within a community. Historically, it's fallen to a nurse. That's why it gets that title. But the reality is that it doesn't have to be a nurse that does that. The town of Foxborough is working a community paramedic program as well, and has for the last several years. And their community paramedic serves all of the functions that were previously held by a public health nurse as well, and it's working out very well. So not only will this allow better coordination internally between the health department and our agency, which, since COVID, it's been outstanding, but especially since the vaccinations, I can't say enough about the work that the Board of Health and Darlene Coyle has done over the past year. It's been outstanding, and it's been a pleasure for myself and the deputy and our staff to be able to work with them. But I think in some respects it showed that this is going to work, that this type of setup is going to work. But more importantly, it brings this position and its duties full-time into the town. So when the Board of Health needs to call on the community paramedic to deal with some type of an issue in the community, this person is here Monday through Friday, and we don't have to track down, a part-time person. And the community paramedic will also be responsible for providing home visits to our seniors upon referral, either from our Council on Aging, Board of Health, or doctor's offices if need be. So we think that it's a very important role. If you have further questions on the position, Deputy Chief Johnson is here, and he put together a great job description and roles and responsibilities. But to say the least, this is going to be a very, very critical but a very busy position. So at this time, Madam Chair, that kind of concludes sort of the overview. So if the committee wants to just take a look at any of the general line items, that's fine. Like I said, for the most part, it's a level service budget. We saw an increase in medical supplies by $5,000, but ultimately that's ambulance receipts. We saw a slight increase in the health and wellness line item because now that we're in OSHA state, we're required to do more health and wellness testing to stay OSHA compliant. And the other increase was in the firefighter education line. Their contract, it doubled the amount of education, and it's not a lot of money. They're going from $1,000 to $2,000 for an educational stipend, but that was really the largest jump. If you were to look at the budget, it's really the only line that doubled. But again, that represents that 5-point something increase. Other than that, everything is either level funded or it's increased due to a contractual obligation.
All right, thank you, Chief. I appreciate that presentation. So members, do you have any questions? Mr. Kennedy?
I do have a few that I made note of, Madam Chair. Chief, ambulance receipts, how are we doing in terms of collections? You mentioned the company that's out there. How are we doing percentage-wise collection, in terms of collections?
Yep, let me just take a quick look here. So if we go, again, if we go back to what was on the slide, which was 18, if we look at, and collections go, they're tracked in two different categories. They're tracked by those patients that have insurance and those that don't have insurance. So if you look at the 3 fiscal years that I showed, 18, 19, and 20, our collection rate is anywhere from 93 to 96%. So it's an average of 94% for those patients with insurance. And patients without insurance, it goes anywhere from 81 to 86%. So the average would be somewhere around 83, 84%. And then when you look at even the partial year of FY21, the numbers are the same. So historically, our percentage rates have remained consistent, but on the insured, again, we're around that 94%, which is a very, very good collection rate when we look at other communities. And a community's demographic has a lot to do with that, but our percentage rate is very good in comparison.
Great, thank you. And do you want me to just kind of go through the questions I have, or do you want to?
Go ahead. Yep.
Chief, the 4 positions that you're going to be seeking as Blaker Street comes into place, do you anticipate doing that all in one fiscal year, or are you going to try and spread that out over a couple years?
Well, it would be the hope that I do it in one fiscal year, and that's for a couple of reasons. One is it took us 10 years to move the needle from moving minimum shift staffing from 6 to 7. And my fear is that if we try to do this over multiple fiscal years, we're going to be in a situation where I'll finally move the needle to 8 in 2031. And, the reality is that we need to be at 8 now. We need to be at 8 today. So I'm hesitant to do it over a multi-year approach, for that reason. But secondly, in conversations with the town manager and the CFO, I don't think it's going to be a financial hardship on the community, because when the building is fully occupied, we now have, and again, these are based on the numbers that were in the presentation. The CFO could certainly, talk about whether or not those are finite. But we're estimating a $1.2, $1.3 million infusion into the tax levy when the building is fully occupied. So, to talk about, $250,000 to $300,000 to fund 4 positions out of a $1.2 or $1.3 million new infusion, I don't think is going to be a tremendous hardship on the community.
Okay, thank you. So certainly, we won't be the only one vying for that 1.3, though, depending on the age of the population there, and I'm sure the schools are going to be a good chunk of that as well. So, but understandable, seeking those additional positions. Inspection monies relative to that project, will we start to see, will your inspectors, again, that seems like that project has forever been in the works. Where are they currently?
So they're about to break ground over there. There have been crews over there. Right now, they are actually building a couple of duplexes that are going to be the lead-in road into what will ultimately be the 320 housing units, 320 units. So they're building the duplexes, or about to break ground on those duplexes, but they will break ground on those 40B projects this year. And then we anticipate that those will be fully occupied in the next 3 years. So we as the fire rescue department will not see revenue from inspections on those. There will be through DDIS. They'll have to pay a building permit. They'll have to pay some associated fees up front in whatever DDIS negotiated as a, sort of as a package in the beginning. But on an annual basis, we do not charge for those inspections. Those inspections are, many of them that are required by law. Take our liquor establishments, for example. Any property in the town of Auburn that has a liquor license requires a joint inspection with building and fire by state law on an annual basis. Not only Auburn, but no community that I know of assesses those businesses for an additional inspection on something that's required by state law. To be quite honest with you, I would even be opposed to that. It's almost like an additional, it's an additional tax that, the state requires something and then we whack them with an invoice. So this 40B project would essentially be the same. The law requires that there are annual inspections there, but those are not inspections that we would invoice. Much like other inspections on, whether they're town-owned or not, but some of our other elderly, housing projects that require annuals. Nobody's charged for those either.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. And my final question, the community paramedic position, is that going to be a civilian paramedic? Is that going to be a firefighter paramedic? And where would I see that in terms of on the line items here?
So that is sort of that's an unknown at this point. Well, some of it is an unknown. I'm going to advertise the position internally, and if I get an internal member to apply, then the position would stay within the bargaining unit. It would be a firefighter, paramedic position. But if I have no internal interest and we have to go outside, then the deputy and I have talked, and we're going to modify that a little bit. And if we have to bring somebody in from the outside, our plan is that it will be a non-union position, and it will, and most likely won't be a firefighter position either. It would just be the community paramedic, the EMS education, as a non-union position. So some of this is still up in the air because I don't know what I have for internal interest yet. So depending on how that goes will sort of be the follow-up to those next 2 points.
Okay, and for this year, where is that additional salary listed, or is it?
For this, sorry, maybe I misunderstood your question. So for this fiscal year, that salary is in the firefighter's line item.
Thank you. That's all I have. Thank you.
Mr. Marshall, any questions?
I guess my only question would be, we also have a couple other development projects that we anticipate with additional housing in Auburn as well, right? I think the two school buildings that are going to be, are there additional calls that we're anticipating from those as well?
Yes. So we have the Mary D and the JB school. Those are going to be 55 units each, so it'll be a total of 110 units between the two properties. I anticipate the call volume on those properties less than the 100 calls at the 40B housing, but those are estimated to be somewhere of about 30, an additional 30 per building. So between the two buildings, we anticipate it would be an additional 60 calls. And just so you know, those numbers are not, just something that we kind of pull out of thin air. That's based on historical data within like buildings, not only in our community, but a survey sample of like buildings in communities comparable to Auburn. And even, quite frankly, if they're not comparable to Auburn, you could still have a 55-unit, 55 and older community in the city of Boston, and you're still going to be able to derive the same data because it's the same amount of units, it's the same age group. So when you take sample shots of those types of facilities around the Commonwealth, you're able to very closely kind of pinpoint what your estimated annual call volume will be at those properties. So I anticipate an additional 30 per building in those and 100 at the 40B.
Mm-hmm.
And are those calls reflected in our existing force deployment, or would there be additional positions needed once those are fully online as well?
Well, it's forecasted for, I think, what our force deployment is, providing we get to the 8. One of the biggest challenges that we have right now, and we ran into this situation yesterday, as a matter of fact. One of the biggest issues that we have is that engine 1 is not consistent, that it's not staffed consistently. On days where we're at 9 and we have, 2 engines and a ladder and an ambulance that's staffed, or even when both ambulances are out and we have to brown out the ladder, the ability to have 2 staffed engines, that's huge in a community like Auburn where, a third of our call volume, close to 4,000 emergency calls a year, and about a third of our call volume is considered back-to-back. So it is not uncommon for us here to have 3, 4, or 5 emergency calls going on at the same time. And the problem is that even if we're at 9, we're not able to handle that 5th call. But it gets challenging when we can't handle a 3rd call because engine 1 is browned out, where if we had the truck up, we wouldn't be relying on mutual aid as much. So I don't anticipate that there would be a need for an increase in staffing at this point based on the additional call volume, but I will also say that that is taking into consideration that those additional positions will be funded in the next 2 to 3 years, and we can move the minimum shift staffing from 7 to 8. It doesn't sound like a lot, but that one extra firefighter to be able to keep an engine up is the matter of whether or not we're able to respond to an emergency or not, and what the delay from mutual aid is.
Thank you. I guess my last question would just be, is there and this is just my own ignorance, is there a cost for mutual aid? Is that costing our community that we can't respond to calls ourselves?
No, it does not. Mutual aid under state law, when municipalities enter into mutual aid agreements, each municipality bears the cost of that response, both from a salary perspective and an injury perspective. So even if we had a member that was injured in another community, either on an ambulance call or fighting a fire, the financial implications are owned by the town of Auburn. And that's fair. Just as if an Oxford firefighter was injured here, the town of Oxford would bear the financial responsibility of that injury. So it's really a one hand washes the other situation. And, the reality is that equally, we don't do any more or less mutual aid than any other community. When at the end of the year, statistically, when it all shakes out, we're going into Oxford and they're coming here, maybe within 10 calls or something like that, but it's definitely not disproportionately off where we went to Oxford 70 times and they only came here 30. It's a very even distribution. And again, there would be no way that any municipality would be able to function from a financial standpoint if we had to pay for mutual aid. So it's a one hand washes the other, and definitely mutual aid over the years is something that we've all come to rely on, and the reality is that none of us could do what we do without mutual aid.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Coleman, any questions?
No, I have a question. The information was very detailed, so I'm good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. I have a couple of questions for you, Chief. What's going on with engine 1? Last we heard, it was going to go to Florida to get fixed, and we were using an older engine 1 until that got repaired. Is the equipment still being repaired, the vehicle?
You're on mute, Chief.
Sorry. The engine that went to Florida is our engine 3. That's the primary engine out of the West Street station. That is in Florida, having the repairs made. Engine 1, which is our spare piece, that is currently first out of the West Street station. And Deputy, correct me if I'm wrong, are we anticipating engine 3 to be back sometime in June?
That's correct. Engine 3 should be back sometime in June.
Great. So June, okay. My other question is about the SAFER grant. We're still participating in that grant. What year are we in on that?
I'm going to have the deputy discuss the SAFER grant.
Okay.
Currently, we're on year 2 of the SAFER grant
So,
at this time, and we are still participating in it, and we're hoping, due to COVID, there's been a lot of talk about allowing you to extend it. So if that is an opportunity for us, we would look to extend it so that we could take that burden off the town a little longer.
okay. So would that mean that, so fiscal year 21 is a year 2, so fiscal year 22 that we're looking at now, is that the year 3?
No, that would be the year 2. We're in year 1 now. We're going into year 2. Sorry.
That's okay. I just want, perfect, thank you. All right, and how many ambulances do we have right now, and how many are on the road?
Currently, we own 3 ambulances. We're in the process of purchasing another one to replace one of the frontline pieces. We maintain 2 ambulances on the road all the time at the paramedic level, and we're going to be holding on to 4 ambulances due to the fact that we do have a lot of mechanical issues with ambulances due to their constant use. And based on the DPW maintenance, they've requested that we keep an additional ambulance in spare status. So we'll have 2 in the spare status that we'll be able to use. Many times we're down to 1 ambulance due to mechanical issues, so this will help solve that.
Okay, great. So when do you think you'll get that, that new ambulance? I thought it was coming in, I thought it was going to be coming this past summer.
The new ambulance has been ordered, it's been purchased.
Oh, okay.
And it's currently on the line. There was a delay with Ford as far as getting the chassis, and now the chassis is actually at the factory, and they're currently building it as we speak. We are also hoping to have that by June as well.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yep.
if I may, I know the chief indicated in his presentation that we may see a reduction in ambulance receipts as a result of COVID. I just want to let the committee members know that we have a pretty solid balance in the ambulance receipt account. We currently have about $3.6 million. So over the years, we were able to purchase these ambulances outright without entering into a lease on those vehicles. Given the fact that we've had a healthy balance for a number of years now, and that balance continues to grow. So that's a good thing.
It is. It's a very good thing. It's a good use of the, of that funding. It's a good use of that revenue, okay? All right. I don't have any more questions. Members, well,
Yeah,
You reminded me of one additional question. Kevin, go ahead.
Okay, Mike. Chief, can you just clarify, we talked a little bit about mutual aid and staffing. Obviously, with the exception of the city of Worcester, how many of our bordering neighbors are full-time fire departments, meaning they don't rely on a call force to supplement at certain days, weeks, hours of for their shifts?
So again, everybody outside the city of Worcester, Town of Oxford operates a combination department, so they have 4 full-time firefighters on duty at a time, and they actually just opened their north end station. So they have 2 firefighters in their north and 2 firefighters out south, which has actually helped us because it's increased, or I shouldn't say increased, it's shortened the ambulance response time to Auburn because that ambulance is now coming out of the north station. But then Millbury is completely on call. The Leicester Fire Department's completely on call, but they do have, Leicester has a full-time ambulance, 1 ambulance that's staffed at the paramedic level every day.
Okay, so just to sort of make a point that our staffing issues are, it's not as easy to rely on a full-time department being surrounded by all full-time departments to respond with engines and ambulances when many of these communities are still in part, if not fully, relying on call firefighters to fill those mutual aid requirements for us.
Yeah, absolutely. That can be a challenge, especially during the day. When many of the call firefighters, from Leicester or Millbury, that are working, they do a good job, when they get here for us. But sometimes there is a delay in that aid, arriving. So yes, good point.
Well, thank you. And I think sometimes when I bring up some of the communities that are still operating call fire and call ambulances, some somewhat affluent communities, the Graftons and the Sturbridges, that people are sort of shocked and think I'm giving them inaccurate information. But I don't know if people really always value the fact that we've got the full-time fire and full-time ambulance personnel in here in town to meet our needs. So, it's difficult to see additional positions on the financial end, but as far as the safety and wellness of the community, it's an important thing.
Thank you.
thank you. Michael?
Yeah, my one additional question would be, would we anticipate an additional maintenance or need to replace more quickly the engine station at the West Station if it was fully staffed and, I guess, able to respond to more calls?
No. When you look at our capital plan, on an annual basis, I submit not only a 5-year capital plan, but I submit a 20-year capital plan. And when you look at the way that our apparatus is replaced, we replace an engine we buy a new engine every 5 years, which allows us to keep that piece of equipment on the road for 15. We buy a new ambulance every 3 years, which means we don't have a primary ambulance that is in the frontline status for more than 6. So it's on frontline status for 6, backup status for 4. So then they're out the door every 10. Smaller, staff vehicles. We've been keeping our staff vehicles up to 12 years. So we have a good rotation. The reality is that as long as, the equipment is maintained and it's fixed when things break, you can get the longevity out of them. I think a lot of departments in years past, Auburn included, we hung on to stuff for too long. The old rule of thumb was, you kept the fire truck for 30 years. But the reality is that the last 7 you would duct tape and bubble gum and the thing together because it really shouldn't have been on the road for 30 years. But a lot of things have changed in the fleet maintenance perspective over the years, especially as more of the vehicles have become more computerized. And our Ken Reboyne, who does a great job in our fleet maintenance division, he'll tell you the same thing, that trucks are not built the same way today that they are in the past, especially with the computerization. It's when the engines are driven by computers, it's the software that becomes out of date, and it's not necessarily an engine problem, it's the computer parts that make the engine run that becomes the issue. But again, the other things that we're seeing is the types of materials that are being used, aluminum, galvanized type stuff, and the things that, the state and that we're putting on the roadways, which is exactly why after 10 years, Engine 3s in Florida get new frame rails, because some of the chemicals that we're treating roads today, they're harmful underneath the vehicles, not only your personal vehicle, but emergency equipment as well. So it does a great job on clearing the snow and ice off the street, but there's a secondary problem, that comes to that. But the short answer to the question is, no, I don't anticipate that with an increase in call volume that we'll be, needing to replace vehicles on a quicker maintenance schedule. I think the CIP plan and the rotation that we have for our equipment, I think it's a great plan. We're very fortunate that the town has been able to stick to that plan for many years, and I don't anticipate any changes in it moving forward.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay, good. Thank you. So why don't we vote on the budget, and then we're going to look at the CIP and see if we have any questions. So we're looking at, for the Fire Rescue Department, the bottom line requested amount, let's see, the town manager recommendation, $3,668,045. And that's an increase to, as the chief mentioned, an increase to fiscal 2021 of $3,393,347, and that's because those contractual increases were not included in that budget. They came in after the budget was presented to town meeting. Do I hear a motion to recommend?
Motion to recommend.
Second.
Thank you. Okay, all in favor. Kevin?
Yes.
Ed?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
And myself, yes. Okay, great. So I'm looking at the CIP. Does anyone have any questions for the CIP?
So, Madam Chair, it sometimes looking at that, it can be a little confusing. The only new item for FY22 on our CIP is the base radio replacement. So it'd be $55,000 annually on a 5-year lease for a total of $275,000. And that base radio replacement, that's going to replace all of our infrastructure at our main repeater site on Crowell Hill, as well as the backup repeater site at the Packagug School, as well as put in a couple of voters, which currently the Fire Rescue Department does not have, but we're going to put a few voters around town as well. So that is our only new CIP item for 22.
Okay, thank you. I do have a question looking at this for, actually, I don't have a question on that. All right, so hearing no questions about the CIP, I think we're all set. Chief, thank you very much for coming to present your budget tonight. Thank you for the presentation.
Very welcome. Thank you. You're welcome. It was good to see you all.
Okay. All right, the next on our agenda is the DPW. Who is caller 4 on our,
Madam Chair, I think that's Ken Fairbanks.
Oh, okay. Should I label him? I guess we'll.
Sure, why not?
Sure, why not?
I'd like to label him
All right.
sometimes too.
Let me rephrase that. Okay, all right. All right. You said Ken Fairbanks. All right. I'm trying to stay on top of this stuff here. All right. I'm trying. Okay, that's it. All right, well, Mr. Coyle and Ms. Paquin, nice to see you this evening. We have your budget here, and would you like to tell us about it first or make a presentation before we go through it?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Finance Committee. As you indicated, Joanna Paquin, the Assistant DPW Director and Sewer Superintendent, is here with me, and also Ken Fairbanks is also here to answer any questions as well. So I can point out some of the highlights in our budget and go through that briefly for you, and then be happy to answer any questions that you may have. So I'll start with the engineering budget. For all of the salaries were adjusted based on the contractual agreements going through the entire DPW budget, and the majority of our line items were level funded. And I have a few that I would highlight just to bring to your attention. In the engineering budget, the first one is roadway reconstruction at the bottom of the engineer's budget. Is currently budgeted at $435,000. Due to COVID last year, we had reduced that budget by $100,000, not knowing what impacts that COVID may have on the town going forward. So I think it was a conservative approach in talking with the town manager and assistant town manager. There's a commitment that we would revisit that in the fall if revenues allow us to fund that back to the $535,000 if that's possible. So I think that's a good thing. I think it's great that the town puts these funds towards our roadway infrastructure, and as everyone can see, it's made a big difference in town. So I'm happy to hear that we're looking to hopefully reinstate the additional $100,000 on that line item. In the stormwater budget, just to point out, a couple of years ago, we increased this budget to accommodate or allow for an additional engineer. Last year, we did hire another engineer, but with the retirement of Jeff Mitchell, Joanna moved into Jeff's position, and new engineer, Eilish Corey, who's done a tremendous job, moved into Joanna's position, so that left us short an engineer again. So we were fortunate enough just recently, long time coming, able to hire another engineer to fill this vacancy. We went out several times. We were unsuccessful in getting candidates. And during COVID, we had also a delay in filling this position as well. But I'm happy to say the new engineer will be starting Monday and will play a critical role in compliance with stormwater management in our EPA mandates, which are getting greater and greater each year. I'm happy to say I think the town's in good shape right now, but this position is desperately needed to assist us with continuing to be in compliance. Let's see, so the highway budget, probably just noteworthy to talk about snow and ice here. This year, I expect we have not received all of our invoices to date for some of the private contractors and some of the salt purchases, and I believe that we're going to finish the year, barring no snowstorms, which I hate to predict at this point that we won't get any, because we all know that that's still possible. But if the winter were to end, I believe that we will probably finish up the year in the black. I think we're going to be under budget. And this particular year, although it seems like it wasn't a bad year, we did have 6 feet of snow. In an average winter, we typically get 5 feet of snow. So it was above average. And if you remember, we started back in October. I think we had somewhere around 10 inches of snow back in October. February was a tough winter. But I can say March has been very good to us, knock on wood, so hopefully it stays that way. So again, we should finish in the black with the snow and ice, so that's a good thing. Facility maintenance, really no significant changes there. A slight increase in the part-time custodian account, and that was just to bring our full-time custodian, who has done a tremendous job in particular during COVID, keeping our buildings clean. We're trying to bring his salary up to a comparable salary that custodians make in the school department and in other towns. So there's a small increase in that budget, a little over $4,000, about $4,500. In the fleet maintenance account, I can tell you the motor vehicle repairs are getting more and more expensive. Tonight, we also, you'll see we have a transfer because of the cost. And it really depends on, what the breakdowns are. And from the beginning of the year, some of the vehicles, we had 3 of them this year that 2 in particular required $15,000 in repairs, and front end loader was close to $10,000 in repairs. So when they break down, sometimes they can a major cost and a major hit to our budget. We've kept it at the 175 and hoping next year that we can hold at that number, but obviously that's something that's kind of a moving target, and it's be difficult for me to say exactly that's going to stay at 175. We're hoping it does, but we'll have to keep an eye on that budget next year. Parks Department, that stayed. All of these were pretty much level funded. Parks is level funded. Golf course, very noteworthy. Last year, believe it or not, with COVID, we started the year thinking this is going to be a very difficult year for us. And oddly enough, it turned out to be the best year financially for us because people couldn't travel to go on vacation, so they stayed home. And obviously, outside activity was something they were all looking for. And so financially, I believe we finished the fiscal year somewhere around $430,000. In the calendar year from last year to this January, we were upwards of over $450,000. So we've had excellent success with the golf course. We haven't used any of the funds from tax levy to fund the golf course. It's all been by the users and of the facility. And also noteworthy is the equipment that we purchased when we first took over the golf course. We just made the final payment on all of the Toro equipment, maintenance equipment, and we're actually moving towards replacing all of the golf carts currently. I believe they're 4 years old now. We're finally seeing an uptick in some of the maintenance and them breaking down, and we did great with the trade-in value on them. I believe we were somewhere in the order of about $3,500 for a used cart, and the new carts, the numbers are approximate. We paid about $5,000 or so for a new cart. So, and that was, I think, due to the effort of our golf course superintendent working with some of the dealers and getting them to sharpen their pencils. And I guess he did a tremendous job. And so we're looking forward to getting new golf carts. And again, all the other maintenance equipment will be paid off. So the payments come July for the equipment are going to be in the vicinity of $23,000 a year. So in the past, our total payments were closer to $65,000. So some of the equipment that is being paid off will now be able to replace some of the equipment on the golf course itself, in particular some of the irrigation system upgrades we might be able to complete this year. So we're happy about that. And I do have to say we have a great staff at the golf course, excellent groundskeeper, and the superintendent is, I couldn't say more about the superintendent, how great of a job he's doing. We're very, very fortunate to have him, extremely hardworking individual. Moving on to the cemetery, I believe the bulk of the cemetery budget, if not all of it, is level funded. The sewer budget, a couple of things I'll talk about. The line item operations manager. This was something that Joanna and I have talked about within the sewer department that we see a need for. Ken Fairbanks has been working as the highway, parks, and cemetery superintendent and more or less operates as an operations manager for our staff. Day-to-day operations, meets with the staff in the morning, gets everybody out the door, and gets them working. We felt that the need to bring the sewer employees into the same operations as the other divisions, and also works very well when we want to move employees around as to where the needs are for all the departments. So Ken Fairbanks would serve as operations manager and just have additional tasks assigned to him and responsible for managing what they're doing day to day. Myself and Joanna, we're tremendously busy every day, just day-to-day operations. It's hard for us to get out the door just with what we have to do constantly. And so this allows Ken to be able to work with the employees and make sure that we're aware of what each person is working on and where the needs are, and maybe we could shift manpower accordingly. Also, very important is the Upper Blackstone sewer treatment plant. They now refer to as Upper Blackstone Clean Water facility. Did an excellent job in holding their budget to a minimum increase this year. The other communities, the city of Worcester, Auburn, Millbury, Holden, Leicester, we in Rutland felt it was very important with COVID that they try to minimize any increase. So they went through their budget and they were able to keep their increase down to less than 1%. So they're at 0.9% increase, which is probably the lowest increase that we've seen in many years. So that resulted in about a $15,000 increase. And for the town of Auburn last year, myself and Joanna, through the CFO, recommended no increase for the rate for the sewer rates. So we kept it a flat line last year for the users. So it's good to see the Upper Blackstone keep it at less than 1%. And then looking at the budget, you can see the total DPW increase was 1.62%, so less than 2%, and total tax levy increase of 1.97%. The DPW is less because than the tax levy because the sewer budgets and the golf course budgets are through retained earnings. So I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have relative to the budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go Mr. Coleman first. Do you have any questions for Mr. Coyle?
No, I didn't have any questions. Thank you.
Okay. Mike, do you have any questions?
I think I'm good for now. Thank you.
Okay. And Mr. Kennedy?
Just quickly, and it may be as much an Ed question as anything. So for fleet maintenance, do we track which town departments where that money is going to? So it just seems that accounting purposes, almost those dollars should be charged towards those individual departments as opposed to the DPW budget. So if the police is using $80,000 in fleet repairs and fire's using X number of dollars, or just a breakdown. It was just sort of an accounting question more than it was the expenditures. I know the guys are doing great work and have saved us a ton of money doing the stuff in-house, but just to show up on both budgets when it's really expenses that are operating expenses for those other departments. So I guess that's.
And through the chair, I do have some information on that if you wanted me to jump in as well.
Yeah.
So I can tell you, Kevin, before we had our own fleet maintenance, all the departments had their maintenance costs embedded in their operational budget. But it made sense for tracking purposes and coordination of purchasing and activities to have it under one umbrella. And as a result of that, we're able to save the town money by purchasing in bulk, whether it be oil, whether it be tires, or whether it be anything like that. It just made sense to put it all under one department. That being said, they do track costs by department through a software program that we purchased. And I think that's what Bill was going to allude to, we can track it individually by department. What vehicles are being maintained, at what cost, how often, at what mileage. All that statistical data is being maintained.
That's correct, Ed. That's what I was going to add. And I can say, for the most part, the DPW vehicles, mainly because of the sheer volume of vehicles that we have, are the larger percentage of the budget. And, you know, obviously we have a lot of six-wheel dump trucks. I think we have 8 in the fleet. We have 3 front-end loaders. All of those vehicles, when they go down, can tend to be rather expensive to fix. Second to DPW, I believe, would be the fire department, would be the second in terms of cost, and then police would be third, and then obviously town hall vehicles, which they have a minimal number, would be a small fraction of the budget.
So I guess the basis of my question is, behind the scenes, those decisions are being made, how many vehicles to keep online based on age, cost, you know, a multitude of factors. Those decisions are being made behind the scenes as to keep vehicles on inventory. They're not worth to keep on inventory anymore because they're costing us too much to maintain and put tires on it, all the things to keep it roadworthy.
Right. We work obviously very closely with Ken Raboyne. He's in charge of all the fleet vehicles. We depend on him heavily to advise us when a vehicle gets to a point where it's in such disrepair that it's no longer cost effective. I think we just had one recently in inspection services that went down. It was an old Crown Vic that came from the police department, excuse me, and Ken just said the vehicle is not worth fixing anymore. So we do have some older six-wheel dump trucks that I think the oldest one we have is 2004, but it's still definitely worth keeping those trucks brand new at 210,000, and you know, having that in our department, those vehicles is a huge benefit to us. So those vehicles are still in pretty good shape. I think our goal is typically some of the pickup trucks, once you get to around 10 years old, sometimes you start spending more money than they're worth to fix. The larger trucks, we seem to be getting 15 years comfortably with them. You know, originally we were thinking, you know, looking at a 10-year rotation on the six-wheel dump trucks, but we're finding some of the trucks that are 15 years or older are still in pretty good shape. So, you know, we keep those in rotation. So the 04 truck is our oldest six-wheel dump, then we have 2 that are 07. And then the others beyond that, I think, are all probably less than 10 years old. So we're in pretty good shape with our fleet right now.
And Kevin, in terms of capital planning, we do put a life expectancy on our vehicles and program those replacements into the CIP. And then we examine that on an annual basis to determine whether or not we want to target that date when a vehicle is retired. So in some cases we may advance it by a year. In some cases, we may put it off for a year or two, all depending on the condition of the truck, the mileage, the maintenance that was put into the truck. Number of factors come into play when our department heads do an assessment of their rolling stock on an annual basis.
And if I could add to that too, through the chair, some of the equipment surprises you. It's for example, the sidewalk tractors that we use to plow the sidewalks and maintain the vegetation on the sides of the roads. They tend to take a lot of wear and tear, and those vehicles, I believe, they're upwards to $140,000, and they break down quite frequently. Because as you can imagine, when you're plowing the snow on a sidewalk, sometimes you don't always know what's under that snow, and we get quite a few breakdowns. So there's a lot of repairs on the sidewalk tractors, and again, they're costly. So each year we reevaluate the needs, because sometimes we think that we're going to need a new truck within the next 5 years, and then in talking with Ken Raboyne, they'll say, you know what, the sidewalk tractor, they're in rough shape, so we might want to start revisiting replacement of one of those pieces of equipment sooner than later. So we do modify it as needed. And, you know, when I first came here, we looked 20 years in the past. We had trucks from 1984, back then. It was more than 20 years, and we looked 20 years ahead to where we were going with all the equipment. So it was a 40-year snapshot in time. And the town has done a great job of bringing our equipment, in line with the needs of the department and keeping, our employees safe with the newer equipment. And so we're grateful for that.
Okay, thank you. And just quickly on recreation, but I noticed we're keeping Memorial Day and 4th of July budget numbers in there. Are we still hoping that we might be able to pull off some sort of event, or are we just sort of keeping those as placeholders?
I think we're keeping those as placeholders. Certainly when we put the budget together in January, we were hopeful that maybe we would come out of this COVID pandemic. It's looking more likely than not. We're not going to be having those celebrations at this point in time. But certainly we didn't want to strip it away early on without knowing what the future was going to bring. So.
And I know my last point will just be, I know I'm surprised Eric Addison jumped off the call. I know he was sticking around for the stormwater update, and I know that's why Joanna came tonight, was to talk to us about stormwater runoffs and federal requirements. No, nice job with the budget. So
We will be happy to talk about the MS4 permit if you want to stick around.
All right, thanks, Kevin. I have a couple of questions. My first is about Chapter 90 money. What did we get for fiscal 21, and what do we anticipate for fiscal 22?
It's been holding steady at about 610,000. So it hasn't really, we haven't had much of an increase over the years. From time to time, I think a couple of years ago, there was an additional amount, and I don't know if you remember how much they gave us, but from year to year, there's always a push from MMA, the Massachusetts Municipal Association, to increase the appropriation from $200 million to $300 million across the state. They've been pushing for that for years and unsuccessfully. So it's been held at $200 million for many years now. But from time to time, the legislators have given us an increase. I think there was one infusion of 50,000, and there might have been another one a few years back of a couple 100,000. But for the most part, it's been held at 610,000 per year.
Okay. So I also noticed in the CIP, there's a roadway improvement. We do that every year, $100,000. Is that used in the same way as the Chapter 90 money and the other amount?
Some of it is. What we have to do is the roadway improvement. We need to keep some funds available for our DPW staff, for crack sealing, for berm repairs, for patches that we do, and so a lot of that work will come out of that line item. If there's another 30,000 or so available towards the end of the year, we'll put it towards the roadway contractor. I mean, we try to put all the money into the roads. All the projects are designed in-house, bid in-house, inspected with the town engineers. But the bulk of that line item is for maintenance, and then some of it can go into the contract for roadway repairs.
Okay. And what roads are on schedule to be repaired this year?
Well, I haven't put that list together yet, so
All right.
we haven't made an announcement yet on that at this point. But I can tell you that a big one that is something moving forward quickly is Brotherton Way. The town was very successful in receiving a grant for $280,000 through the state, and this is under the Shared Streets program. I think it was intended for as a COVID relief, and try to encourage people to be outside and also to visit the businesses as well. So we put the grant application together between the DPW engineering office, and this was the fourth time I think we went out for grants for Brotherton Way, and we actually were not really even thinking this one was on the radar, but we submitted the grant and we were fortunate enough to get it. So that's going to happen quickly, and what you're going to see is the sidewalk on the pond side of Brotherton Way is going to become a shared use path, and that is going to be 12 feet wide. Brotherton Way will actually, in some areas, will have a median installed. I'm sure you're all aware that it's a 4-lane road, very wide for what purpose it serves, and so we will be providing a median with turning lanes to access the site drives and have one lane in each direction. It's going to happen very quickly because the grant, we had to be shovel ready with our project. We have it designed. We did a brief presentation with the select board the other night to let them be aware of the project, and the funds have to be expended by the end of May. Oh. So the work will be happening in the next couple of weeks. We'll be starting out there.
Okay. That is fast. How about the rest of the Drury Square project? I thought that the state was going to be starting that pretty soon.
Sure. So that's the Auburn Street project. They started last fall, going into the winter, with mainly just drainage work. I was told that they would be starting again April 15th. I suspect it may be sooner with the good weather that we've had. So that project will be significantly completed by the end of the year. That's Lynch Associates is the contractor, J.H. Lynch out of Millbury. I believe the total project value is somewhere in the vicinity of $4 million, just a little under $4 million, which will tie into the Brotherton Way project as well. So we're pretty excited about Auburn Street, as everyone I'm sure has heard by now, with the ornamental lighting and decorative streetscaping items, and so we're pretty excited for that to get completed. So by the end of the fall, I think it'll be significantly complete, maybe some punch list items next spring.
Okay.
So there'll be a lot going on, and then the town projects, which we'll be announcing probably in the next few weeks as well. Okay.
And my other question was about the, I think it was the Pinrock Station, where that redundant line was going to get put in. Has that occurred yet?
Sure. So it has not occurred yet. It went out to bid this winter. So the project required land takings, and so initially myself and Joanna and the town council, along with the Upper Blackstone's attorney, were trying to get I believe there were 8 or 9. Joanna, it was 9 takings total?
I believe it was 9.
9. So there were 9 takings. So we were trying to work with the abutters for them to voluntarily sign over the easements with an appraised value with an estimated dollar value, which would be provided to them. I think it was something that we were hopeful for, but unfortunately, it didn't work out. Some of the abutters were willing to grant the easements. Some were not willing to grant the easements. So inevitably, we've had to go through the eminent domain process. The Upper Blackstone Board of Directors has the authority for the land takings. That is scheduled for April 14th to take those easements. There have been appraisals assessed for the value of the properties. And concurrently, at the same time, we advertised the project. We had gone to town meeting for $2.2 million. We're happy to say that the low bid came on just under $1.5 million. So the work will happen this year, and during probably late spring into the summer, into the fall, we'll have that redundant line in place. And the whole purpose of this redundant line is that we have 1.5 million gallons of sewage that comes out of Pinrock. That's our daily flow. Sometimes, as Joanna can tell you, we've exceeded over 5 million gallons in a rain event, which is significant in one day. So, knock on wood, if we ever had a break on that line from Pinrock to the Upper Blackstone, we'd be in trouble. So this line will allow some redundancy with that existing infrastructure is now coming upwards to probably 45 years old or plus. We're pushing the life expectancy of that system.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. You can't wait for that one to break before you fix it. That one, you've got to stay. No. You got to stay ahead of that one. No. Yeah.
Right, so, and the only other point I would make is when we went out to bid a little earlier and didn't have the right-of-way completely done yet. We were trying to do those together. So we wanted the bids to come in when the warrant was open, just in case the bids came in higher than we anticipated, and if we had to go back to town meeting. So again, we're fortunate the bids came under.
Okay.
So that's good news, and, you know, we do have a low bidder and hope to start out there in the next few months.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, gentlemen, any other questions about the budget? No, all right, so let's, before we look at the CIP, let's approve this. So the town manager recommendation for the Department of Public Works, and we vote on the bottom line, $5,872,411. That's a 1.62% increase to last year, and a $95,518 increase to last year. Do I hear a motion to recommend?
Motion to recommend.
Second.
Okay, thank you. So, all in favor, Kevin?
Yes.
Ed?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
And myself, yes. Thank you. All right, let's look at the CIP. Are there any, do the members have any questions about any of the items? No, I don't have any questions, so I guess we're all set then with the CIP, and we'll be voting on that in a couple of weeks or so. So, Mr. Coyle, you have a couple of transfers, right?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so let's see, the first one is for the DPW Fleet Maintenance Department, coming from the wages account and going to fleet maintenance, $10,000, and that's due to numerous repairs. The fleet maintenance account requires additional funds. Do I hear any questions about this? No, so do I hear a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Thank you. Okay, all in favor. Kevin?
Yes.
Ed?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
Okay, and myself, yes. Thank you. And the next transfer is DPW Sewer Division. So coming from contingency fund line and going to the Upper Blackstone line, $1,368.38. Reason for transfer, original budgeted amount did not include charges for Auburn connections to Worcester sewer system. Okay. All right, do I hear a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, all in favor. Kevin?
Yes.
Ed?
Yes.
And Michael?
Yes.
And myself, yes. All right, and the other transfer coming from the contingency account in the sewer division and going to heating fuel, $1,500. Reason for transfer to cover Eversource bills through 6/30/2021, bills which have been higher than expected. Do I hear a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Second, thank you. So all in favor, Kevin?
Yes.
Ed?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
And myself, yes. Okay, so good. I think we're all set, Mr. Coyle and Joanna and Ken.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming today and presenting your budget.
Okay, have a good night. Thank you.
Too. Thank you. All right, so Finance Committee, we looked at the three budgets we were supposed to. We voted on the transfers like we were supposed to, and let's look at the next two meetings. Next week, we have Library, Auburn Youth Commission, Veterans, Solid Waste, Reserve Account, Maturing Debt, Interest, and Pension and Benefits. And on April 7th, 2 weeks from tonight, we'll look at the warrant and vote on the CIP. Okay? When does the warrant close, Ed?
Madam Chair, it already closed. The warrant, it was presented to the board to forward to town council for his review. Once it's reviewed, it will come back, the Board of Selectmen will take a position, and it will be available for you to take a position as well, the committee.
Okay. All right, good. Does anyone have anything else they want to talk about? Any questions? Yes, no? All right, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second, all in favor, just say yes, aye. Have a good night, everyone.
Yes.
Next week.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.